What does it mean to engage youth in meaningful ways in the movement to end sexual and intimate partner violence? It's a question I hear all the time. We try to fill our programs with young people and inspire the next generation, but we keep falling short. Our numbers drop off, school gets busy, we scratch our heads and try again next year. But what if it doesn't have to be that way? What if there's a better answer, but we just aren't listening for it? You're listening to PreventConnect, the podcast where we bring together voices across the movement to end sexual violence to give you the tools you need to effectively practice primary prevention in your daily life and at work. I sat down with two youth leaders in California, Zoe Meyer and Kaile Fernandes, to talk about how we can redesign our spaces and our systems to make room for and honor youth voices. One of these guests and I go way back, and honestly, I learned so much from both of them. I think you will too. I'm Janae Sargent, and this is PreventConnect. So the first question that I have, just wondering about each one of your experiences and journeys, what brought you to get involved with sexual violence prevention and social justice?
Well, I guess I'll go first. I started because I was really just brought upon it when Miss Janae Sargent here came to my high school, and I just felt pretty motivated by what you had to say. And I thought not only was it a good way to get involved with the community that I had just moved into, but it was something personal to me because I know that I have experienced some very traumatic relationships, and I would hope that I can help prevent that for other people.
I originally got involved with a nonprofit called Center for the Pacific Asian Family, which is committed to ending domestic and sexual violence in API communities. And I got involved because I had experience myself and with my mom. I was just really inspired by the first Rooted Leadership program that I participated in, and I wanted to get more involved myself.
I think what I'm really excited about in this conversation is that both of you are from totally different communities and have different experiences doing leadership in sexual violence prevention, but you're both making a huge impact. So I think now I'd love to hear a little bit about what each of you are doing in your specific communities around sexual and intimate partner violence prevention.
After participating in the Rooted Leadership program, in 2019, I've been volunteering at CPAF ever since then. I helped organize a youth forum last year with a focus on youth advocacy and, of course, spreading awareness about healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships. And I was inspired to start a club at my school, which basically focuses spreading awareness, educating people, because I realized that people in my school weren't very aware of what's going on in our community.
I have been involved with Close to Home, which is a community action group in San Luis Obispo. We have basically been oriented to educate and prevent domestic and sexual assault and intimate partner violence. I first got involved around early 2019, I think. Like I said earlier, when Janae came to my high school, I have kind of been a part of it since we started. I helped a bit with the logo making and the creation of a survey, which has helped to gauge how our community feels about these issues and where we can go with taking action. We did community conversations and had a lot of really good conversations with locals about these issues after our survey that helped us to decide to make a zine, which had preventative and educational information in it. And we have just released another survey.
That sounds really impactful for both of you and your local communities. And I think, what I think is really interesting about both of you as well, and I know especially with Zoe, because like you said, we do know each other, and Kaile, I've learned a little bit about the work that you're doing hearing that you two have had a lot of opportunities to interact with adults, to interact with people who do this work professionally, and to enter into some statewide spaces. Kaile, you've been involved in organizing a statewide call for youth activists. And Zoe, I know that you've been involved in statewide meetings around close to home and youth organizing. So what has that been like, getting connected on a larger scale and entering some of those spaces?
Sure, I was able to connect with my local government and some of the statewide organizations of close to home. And it's really been eye-opening to how much work we still have to do, but also how much work is being put into these efforts. It's really amazing to see young people around my age all across the state be so active and passionate about these topics that I know is deeply impactful. And I don't know, it's just something we all hold close.
Because I organized and helped facilitate the youth forum last year, it was online, which was disappointing because of the pandemic, and we didn't get to interact in person. But it was also really cool because we got the opportunity to interact with people all over the country, and even people calling in from other countries like Cambodia. It was just amazing hearing about their activism in their communities and getting to interact with them. I still follow a lot of them on their social media handles, so I continue to see their activism in their life.
Has anything been surprising as you've interacted with local government, a lot of adults who are invested in public health and sexual violence?
The thing that continues to surprise me is the lack of education about relationships, whether it be adults or youth in my school or programs that I'm a part of.
I definitely agree with Kaile on that. And I have generally been surprised and confronted myself a few times with the amount of emotional and intellectual maturity that is required to be working in this, especially when you're repetitively involved. And it's also, I think, surprising to see how that emotional and logical maturity is lacked in people. Well, I don't want to say everyone. Some of the people who aren't involved with these topics.
I relate. Can't say it gets better over time. But you're right. There are some really powerful spaces, and there are some spaces where we have a lot of room to grow. What do you think the field gets wrong when we talk about sexual and intimate partner violence prevention? Where would you like to see people's efforts really being focused?
I think a lot of the time it's assumed that if people are educated just a little more, that they will suddenly just do better, when these are systemic issues that have been ingrained into our society and the way that we act and live for centuries. So it's really something that needs to be really implanted into all of our business and sociological efforts, I guess. We take these systems and we completely remake them where it's a safe and healthy place for everyone.
I completely agree. I think we just need to have more resources for people to get educated about the topics.
Building off of that, and especially Zoe, I know you talked about systemic issues, which, how do you solve systemic inequity? But if we were dreaming, what do you think that it would take to actually change systemic issues that are in our businesses, in our schools, those things that you mentioned, whether that's with your friends, classmates, or maybe even younger generations? What would you want for them that you didn't get?
Well, in my high school specifically, it's a really hard topic to talk about sometimes, and it's really not talked about enough in school. And I think that prevention training for faculty in high schools could be really beneficial, if not prevention training for students as well.
What my number one dream is in this situation is for children from infancy to teenhood to adulthood is to be taught these basic things that are a foundation for being nonviolent. Things like consent and boundaries, personal empathy and sympathy, even taking these and not only having them for others, but also ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. I know both of you are from California, which is a little bit further ahead than a lot of other states when it comes to comprehensive sexual health education, although not every area is where we would want it to be. But you're totally right, Zoe and Kaile, skills like empathy, like consent, we really want those things to be built up from a young age. If you had a message for maybe some of the adults in power, what would you tell them about the importance of that kind of work?
I know that I would really like to see just more general passion again from adults. I think as we age, we get a bit more beaten down when it comes to these situations. But even if in our brains they never truly lose their gravity. I wish that it wasn't so dulled down to some people. It's not their fault, of course, but this is something that remains important every second of the day for as long as we exist like we do. And I would hope that there was some sort of reality check where people realized that no matter who you are, where you come from, especially if you aren't afforded some resources that people who might be able to or more easily take action against these things, that you would do your best and become a part of these things. Everyone is a part of this.
If you're looking for more content like this, head to PreventConnect.org. We've got tools, guides, and resources on how to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence in your community, all for free and in one easy-to-access digital space. From live web conferences and recordings to a running blog, resource library, e-learning, and online community, PreventConnect has everything you need to implement and evaluate innovative prevention initiatives in your community. All of that and more available for free at PreventConnect.org. So you've both been doing this for a few years. Have there been any big or inspirational moments for you while you've been doing this work? And could you maybe tell me a story about one of them?
I never really had a safe place to talk about my trauma, and I would communicate with my friends, but never in depth because I knew that they wouldn't really understand. But when I was working with CPAF, it provided a safe space for me to talk about my experiences, and it gave me an opportunity to share with others and educate others about the topic. And there was this one really impactful. I don't really know the exact workshop, but I was facilitating it, and I was completely oblivious to the fact that I had the power to spark such meaningful conversation because I was leading the discussions. It was really eye-opening to me.
Working with Close to Home ignited a realization for me, my own sexual and emotional abuse. I think it's just something when you are around certain behaviors, you don't realize that it's not normal and it's not healthy or safe. I remember just being so emotionally impacted by the very first orientation for Close to Home that I ever went to. I just sat there, and I had known quite a bit. I was educated on emotional maturity and how relationships should look like, but really in depth talking about it with these people that created such a safe environment made me realize just how much I had been through and how much I don't want anyone to ever experience that suffering.
Zoe, I remember a few years ago, I was in that orientation with you. And one thing that I remember, because I had just started, you all had so much to say about wanting to feel listened to and supported by adults in your lives, whether that was at school or in the community. And what I so appreciate about both of you is that you've had that opportunity where adults sit back and hand you the mic and say, we are listening. I'm curious, what happens when we as adults open spaces for youth to share your stories? What does that change?
I think I gained a newfound type of trust for adults specifically, when you're a kid, it feels like there's this very distinct differentiation between you and the big people in your lives, because they seem to have it all together, but they never really listen to you when you're scrambling to get yourself together. Having that platform and realizing that you might not be as misinformed or infantile, I guess, as you maybe thought or what led to think you were, is really, really powerful. I felt like a real person for the first time, I guess. And that allowed me to be able to want every person my age to be able to have that mature respect.
I completely agree. I think giving youth a platform and treating them with respect rather than like dismissing anything that they're saying. I'm glad that I've been surrounded by adults who just encourage us and give us our platform to share our ideas and speak for ourselves instead of telling an adult something and having them, skew your words.
The reason that I ask is because we talk about involving youth and bringing youth to our events and how do we get youth in our programs and all of these things. But I think there's a difference between getting youth to come to things and actually creating a safe space for them and changing the way that we run our programs and run ourselves as human beings to honor and empower youth. What's the difference to you between when an adult invites you to a space versus when an adult creates space for you?
Well, youth forums that I've been helping organize, they invite us to the space, and I've gotten the opportunity to, share my insight. They always make sure to ask us before making decisions because they want it to be completely youth focused. I think that's the difference, rather than them kind of facilitating conversation rather than controlling the conversation.
I love that. Facilitating a conversation rather than controlling.
I really love that, Kaile. That was very well put. We might still be learning, but everyone is, no matter what walk of life you're in. And I think kids and adults, respectively, have a lot to learn from each other. And it's really nice to have a space where you're able to explore things and not feel like, oh, they know more than me, so I can't really act like I'm still learning or trying to come up with things on the spot. It's where we all understand that this is something that develops with time and maturity and education. And rather than feeling disconnected, we're allowed to create these circumstances.
Thank you. I think that's going to be really helpful for people to hear. Can you tell me about a couple of moments or things that adults or people working in prevention have done in the past to really open that facilitating space versus controlling? What have they done that's felt powerful or impactful to you?
In Close to Home, when we are creating this survey that is supposed to be curated to really gather information from the local people and how they feel, their thoughts and their gauge on our community, we are able to create our own inquiries and ideas, whether coming from preconceived notions of our community or just general curiosities, I guess, about people around us. We create these poster boards around the room, and we all just spit out ideas, spit out questions and thoughts, and just having a space where you're able to freely think and be curious and create well-formed thought that could go on a poster. It's really nice.
So I'm hearing creative ways for you to share your opinion rather than just, if I were to ask a question to a room of 5 teenagers and no one responded right away, rather than being like, okay, no one wants to say anything, I guess I'll decide it myself, that it could be really powerful to say, I think people have something to say. We just have to create a space where they feel comfortable to say it. Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Yes, it's like quite literally an open space for us to share our thoughts. And I think it's a little less intimidating when it's maybe a little more creative and interactive than just a meeting or a panel.
Yeah, I completely agree with what she said. Allowing youth to collaborate with each other too, I think is really important, rather than just having them raise their hands and give their specific ideas, because that's kind of intimidating. They can all collaborate together and then.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you two are setting off so many light bulbs for me right now, because we talk about strengths-based learning and being strengths-based and empowering with clients and survivors. But obviously, the way that I hold a Zoom meeting with a bunch of 30-year-olds is not going to be the same way that I should hold a space for youth organizers, because we're different and we think differently and we react differently. If I was 17 and in one of the Zoom meetings that I go to, I think I'd fall asleep. I totally get that. What are some things that you would like to see more of to create more safe spaces for youth to share?
I think, like what we said earlier, just providing a space for youth to be comfortable sharing and not having somebody looking over them because it's intimidating.
Some really cool ideas, at least to me, are having a more mainstream, out in the open conversation holding in places like cafes or restaurants, maybe not restaurants, just like somewhere out in the open, somewhere public that is comfortable for teens, where we're able to kind of gauge and work with or even create the environment, and something that's just very not in the spotlight but very public, in the way of it's just not something where it's maybe hushed down, because I know that sometimes people feel awkward or maybe sometimes even ashamed to talk about these things because they're very serious, they're very grave. So just having somewhere open and it's almost lighthearted.
Yeah, of course. We should be bringing things into the community. If I were to ask you to close your eyes and imagine a world free of sexual and domestic violence, what would that look like to you?
To me, that is somewhere where no one's body is controlled or thought of in a preconceived way that isn't already expressed by the person who owns it. And that means sexually, romantically, platonically, we should all have autonomy. We should all have freedom and self-compassion and respectability where it comes to we feel safe in business settings. No one has to scrap together coins to keep the lights on or make sure they have 3 meals a day, where everyone is able to have a roof over their heads and they basically have all of their basic needs met so that they are able to live fully. And that being said, no one has too much power over others. I might be describing something a little radical, but I think generally if we had equity and promised safety, if we had compensation for our time in this world that we live in, that it would be easier to approach nonviolence.
We're here for the radical stuff, radical liberation. It's not too radical. Anyone who says so isn't radical enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that she said. But I think in terms of relationships with each other, just always have respect for each other's values and, I guess, wants and needs. Making sure that everybody feels safe emotionally, physically, open communication. I don't know, just enjoyable relationships for everybody, whether it be platonic, through work, or romantic relationships.
PreventConnect is taking this conversation even further on our social media, and we want you to be a part of the discussion. Join in on the conversation on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we're posting excerpts from this podcast and so many more, and asking experts, practitioners, and followers like you to share your stories and ideas. Search PreventConnect on your social media platforms to get involved. Okay, so now we're going to transition into a couple of rapid fire closing questions. I'm going to ask you something and just say the first thing that comes to your mind, okay?
Awesome.
Okay, great. So what is
Sorry.
No, it's okay. What is something that's really exciting you right now?
Well, I have a track meet later today, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Heck yeah, good luck at your track meet.
Thank you.
I have been just super excited, I guess, by fashion lately. It's kind of what's kept me going, just putting my aesthetic onto myself and expressing out to the world. And also just generally finding some friends. That's been fun.
Oh, congrats on your friends and your fashion. Everyone who can't see Zoe right now, the leather jacket is popping off. I'm very excited for both of you. Okay, next question. What is one hope that you have for the field of sexual violence prevention?
I really hope that it becomes just generally more popular, more normal even, and that it's something that we can all easily approach and consider in our day-to-day lives.
Normalizing conversation about sexual violence from a young age, especially.
Last question, this one really just for fun. If there's one resource, song, YouTube video, podcast, or book that you think people should go check out right now, what would it be?
Settle Down, a song by Ricky Montgomery. Just released it.
Don't drink water for like an hour and then go watch the new Batman movie in its entirety. It's amazing, and it is my favorite action, I think, like crime solving ever.
Oh, I was so confused. Zoe, you said don't drink water for an hour. And I was like, why? What does that have to do with Batman? Right. Obviously, it's been a while since I've been to a movie.
Such a long movie.
Okay, so we got a new song to listen to and we got a movie to go check out. And I will link those in the description for this podcast. Wow. Thank you.
It's on HBO. It's on HBO.
On HBO. Great. Perfect. So Spotify and HBO, everybody. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your time with me, especially in the middle of the school day. Even though I've worked in youth spaces for a while, I feel like I learned a ton from you today. So is there anything that I haven't asked that you really just want to make sure you get off your chest or put out there into the ether?
Not really. Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate this. Even you just holding this for us is really important.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good luck at your track meet, Kaile. Zoe, go show everyone that leather jacket and your fashion. And I'm just really excited for both of you. Thank you so much. PreventConnect is made possible by Valor US, the Centers for Disease Control, and listeners like you. You can find links to all of the things that we talked about, as well as a way to check out Zoe and Kylie's work in this episode in the description. If this podcast inspired you or made you think about ways that you can redesign your space to honor youth leadership, we want to hear from you. Share this episode on your social media and tell us what you're doing to engage youth in a meaningful way. We're publishing new episodes each month, so be sure to subscribe to PreventConnect so you don't miss out. And make sure to check out Valor's other podcasts about social change, leadership moves, and Valor conversations. If you want to learn more about PreventConnect and what we're doing to create a world free of violence, head to PreventConnect.org. And be sure to like, rate, and review us so we can reach more folks like you.